Welcome to this celebration of the new book by Dr. Eddie Glaude. I am Virginia Harriman, the manager and book buyer for Labyrinth Books. We are honored as well to welcome our good friend, Dr. Keeanga Taylor, who will join him in conversation. When they have laid down some markers for us, we should have time to open the floor for some questions. Eddie did pre-sign some books. We have both signed and unsigned, depending on what you need. I think you might be available for a little bit. This event is co-sponsored by Labyrinth and the Princeton Public Library, co-sponsored by Princeton University's Humanities Council and the Department of African American Studies and Religion. Thanks to all of our co-sponsors. Dr. Glaude is an educator, writer, scholar, political commentator, and public intellectual. He's the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor of African American Studies at Princeton, a highly accomplished and respected professor of religion, author of many scholarly works. Dr. Glaude is a former president of the American Academy of Religion. And there's a lot more to say, and he would squirm too much if I went on it that way. But check it out if you guys. Over recent years, his scholarly work has expanded to address urgent questions that readers outside of the Academy are hungry for, taken up in such books as Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, and the New York Times bestseller, Begin Again. That memoir and meditation was for many readers the most urgent and inspiring book of the terrible year 2020. It addressed political and moral darkness and the temptation to give up, and it's what we were reading in the spring and summer of that year when the flood began and we started pulling our Baldwin off the shelves and pouring out into the street to march and chant and kneel for the eternity that it took to extinguish the life of George Floyd. I still carry that viral clip of Eddie Glaude speaking to Nicole Wallace about the myth of American innocence. It is always gratifying for a bookseller to see Dr. Glaude in front of his curated bookshelves with face-outs. And he appears to give light and clarity to the conversation at MSNBC. When Eddie leaves the script, he has put heart and soul, leaves the script, he has put heart and soul into writing and allows the voice of the prophet to soar. These are moments of inspiration that are catching and contagious. He's here in conversation with activist and radical scholar Keeanga Yamahtta-Taylor. She is the author from Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation and Race for Profit and How We Get Free, among many other projects. We were so proud of her when she won a Guggenheim a little while back. Both are among the bright lights of Princeton. So this is a home game for us. Eddie Glaude always makes me think about writing as a conversation with the past. A conversation with the precursors and ancestors and the ghosts. This wonderful book, We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For, crafted out of the W.E.B. Du Bois lectures given at Harvard, feel to me like a reshuffling of the deck, looking both back and forward to revisit, revise, and reintroduce those ideas and thinkers that have shaped him. Dr. Glaude invites us into the room with the philosophers, theologians, writers, mothers, and fathers in struggle with whom he has wrestled himself into being. A writer with an engaged, challenging, nuanced voice. It's a righteously angry, loving, capacious voice that echoes the songs, sermons, speeches, and letters that make up the American radical and prophetic tradition. We are always honored to hand them the mic at Labyrinth. Let's get to it. Please welcome Keeanga Taylor.
You should be up here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Very excited to get into this with you.
I'm a bit nervous.
Okay. All right. So we don't have much time, and I was saying before, this is a deceptively small book, right? It's, I think it's under 200 pages. But there's a lot going on in this book. And so I want to start with what to me is the obvious question, which is the book is based on 3 lectures that you gave at Harvard in 2011. They're Du Bois lecture series. So 2011, under the best of circumstances, 10 years or so is a long time. Under our circumstances, 10 years is a lifetime, times 10. So I'm wondering if you could talk some about this process, right? So you address some of this in the very beginning of the book, but just so people have some idea, you address this at the beginning, but what process were you thinking of in 2011, right? So what were you addressing in these lectures in the first place? And then how does your thinking change when you sit down to revise these lectures? There's a part, it's a small part, but I want it to read, it's a paragraph that I think captures what has transpired. When I delivered these lectures, Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown were still alive. Breonna Taylor had just graduated from high school and was imagining what her future might look like. Eric Garner and Freddie Gray were alive. George Floyd had not moved from Houston to Minneapolis. Sandra Bland was still posting her video commentary, Sandy Speaks. Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi had yet to post anything about Black Lives Matter. The Quick Trip gas station in Ferguson, Missouri was still doing business, and the Penn North CVS in West Baltimore served a community barely keeping its nose above water.
Yeah.
So talk about that process.
Time, then and now, right? First of all, let me just say thank you. The Glaude genius, too.
I always drop everything for Eddie.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for giving me that wonderful introduction. Thank you for all of you for taking time out of your schedule. I want to thank the people who set up the chairs, who keep the lights on, all the people, the labor behind the scenes, the invisible labor. Thank you. But most of all, I want to lift up our table.
Yes.
You have been an extraordinary presence in this community since you stepped foot in it. We have you lifted in prayer, those of us who pray. Those of us who send energy, we're sending you energy. But most importantly, we're going to wrap you in love. So thank you for being here. In so many ways, Keeanga, I had to return to these lectures because I had lost my bearings. The Baldwin book was this odd decision of mine to try to deal with my rage, the rage that was consuming me, that, here we go again. Look at this. They're doing this shit again. And I've been teaching Baldwin's nonfiction. I taught a course with Jeffrey Stout, my dear teacher, on Emerson and Baldwin. But teaching Baldwin's nonfiction during that political season of 2016, I knew he had grappled with a deep sense of disappointment and despair. In the last interview, he said, you can only go to Texas so many times. Texas.
Yes.
Right? And, at some point you feel like a broken motor saying the same thing over and over again. So I knew Jimmy had grappled with America's failure, its ongoing betrayal. And so in this moment in which Trumpism was ascending and I had made this argument in Democracy in Black about blanking out and here we are. I decided to write about Jimmy. And I ran from the chaos and madness of American politics into the chaos and madness of Jimmy's life, and found resources. Then COVID hit, and over 1 million people are dead. Millions. If we think about all of the collateral damage. I lost 2 friends. There seemed to be something broken, and not only broken in the way in which we deal with each other. I felt it in Stanhope Hall. I felt it when we moved over to Morrison. It's just not the same. And I'm not the same. I'm not the same. And so I said, well, let me go back, to use the title of Toni Morrison's documentary, and pick up the pieces that I am. And go back to this moment. And these Du Bois lectures was they were that moment when I dared to try to find my voice as an intellectual. Because I wasn't going to write them, and Lonnie Perry was like, you're going to write these things. Right? So I'm too busy. No, you're going to write these things. Right? So we were building the department. And so I started writing, and I found out as I was writing, I wanted to respond to this maddening and enraging tendency to read Obama as the culmination of the Black freedom struggle. Yes. I was upset at the way in which Obama and his minions were narrowing the scope of what constitutes legitimate forms of Black political dissent. The way the Black radical tradition was being rendered, how it was being deployed, how Black politics were being flattened into a kind of flaccid kind of liberalism that was almost becoming like America's bread, you know. Yes. to poach Jimmy's image in that sense, right? So that was what was going on. How can I intervene? So I was, I'm not a Reedite, as you put it, but I had read Adolph Reed, and I understood the dangers of custodial politics. And I had to get my way there, right? And I'm a Dewey scholar, and I'm reading Emerson. I couldn't help but read Emerson being a student of Jeffrey Stout. And so there was all this stuff kind of wrapped into one. And so when I got back to them, I said, oh my God, I was trying to create myself in this moment. I was trying to find out what were my intellectual resources. Where did Cornel West end and I begin? What is the difference here? And a lot of that had to do with the way in which I was reading, the way in which I was reading Emerson, the way in which I read Dr. King, the fact that I don't come out of the Black prophetic church tradition, but I come out of the Black nationalist tradition. What did it mean for me to go through all of this and end up in the hands of Ella Baker? You know, and so that was the reason. That was the motivation for writing it, and then the motivation for returning was we all need to pick up the pieces. We all need to recognize how broken we are.
But what did you bring with you coming back? How did when did you start revising? When you sat down to, I'm going to finish
When I
these.
sat down?
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to say this. I sat down and
Like last week.
yeah, it was pretty quick. Yeah,
Okay.
I sat down.
So what were you bringing
Grief.
in 2022 that you couldn't have brought with you in 2011?
So it's 23.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really crazy, right? So I'm 23. I sent it to Shamala Sen, who's the senior editor at Harvard. I said, I know this is coming out of the blue, but I decided to return to the lectures. Here we go. And next thing you know, she said, okay, we're going to publish. She had her own publishing schedule. And then I reached out to my closest friends. I sent it to Jeff Stout and Mark Jefferson. Jeff sat back. I felt like I was in graduate school again. 200, 300, done 300 like edits and queries, and it was just great. And all my friends, and so we just did a really quick edit. Well, what did I bring? I brought grief. I brought grief. I brought a maturing pen. I had been finding my voice on the page differently. The writing was transformed, and the experience with the Baldwin book helped that. I think there was a kind of a maturation of a public voice. There was a sense in which I'm becoming more comfortable, right? Trying to figure out how to bring my bibliography to bear on the problems that we face in the confines, within the limits of the soundbite. So there's a maturity of voice there. And so it was brokenness, grief, right? And age. And now I'm not just talking about numbers, I'm just talking about being in the oak barrel. And something was happening. I don't know what happens, when it happens. You move from that moment where you're just simply citing the graduate stuff, as a graduate student, all the stuff you've been reading, and then suddenly all the stuff you've been reading informs the way you're thinking. It's like right here, and it clicks. And so there's less of an anxiety on the page about authorizing your voice with other people's voices. And so I was able to see what I was doing differently. And so there's this, self-cultivation in the pursuit of justice is in radical politics. This is not quite Emerson, this is not quite Dewey, this is not quite Corn. Oh, it's me.
Well, let's talk about you.
I won't be so long-winded, I promise.
No. That's what we're here for. Okay, so the book is deceptively small. And part of that, I was saying to you before, is that it operates on different registers. You're trying to talk about Black politics, both its tradition, but also a trajectory forward that is not dependent on its tradition, but that is necessary to forge new paths for a continuing struggle against racism. But it's also about the country writ large, and what you just described as, even just sitting here, it's a kind of brokenness. The democracy, Trump, all of the issues that animate politics in the U.S. right now. So one of the questions I have for you is it's kind of about both of these things. In 2009, the New York Times runs an article, I think it was called, Is This the End of Black Politics? It's basically an article really asking whether the election of Barack Obama was the fulfillment of a certain kind of objective in Black politics that meant Black politics was no longer necessary. And then, of course, in 2012, 2013, we see a resumption of a different kinds of Black politics, radical Black politics, insurgent Black politics, with the kind of unfolding of Black Lives Matter as an idea, as a social movement. And so the movement threw up similar questions, old questions. And so I'm curious how some of your thinking in the book responds or engages with some of these issues. So some of the immediate issues I think about from that period, right? The half accusation, half charge. Who are your leaders? What are your demands? So there's the question of leadership. which is a question that you take up. Do we need to get beyond the prophetic tradition that looks elsewhere for leadership? Then there's the question of heroism and the hero. And in some ways, I wonder about this within the context of an emergent Black Lives Matter movement, the question of celebrity. And it's maybe overlap with the issues of heroism. And then there are the issues of democracy, both in terms of the movement itself, whose movement is this, and the questions about the objective of the movement, which is about the question of democracy in the country itself. And so I'm wondering about how your engagement with these big questions from the Black political tradition, not necessarily a Black radical tradition, but from a tradition of Black politics, how they engage with the new issues that were presented in this new context of Black Lives Matter.
That's an interesting question. There are a lot of different components to it. I think, in some ways, I'm offering resources to think about what we saw, what we witnessed, right? When I heard those young people declaring sometimes, this is not your grandmama's movement. I'm like, well, you don't obviously know the movement that you're referencing.
I know what your grandmama was doing.
You don't, because we told the story of the Black Freedom Struggle. Some people have told the story of the Black Freedom Struggle as a great man's story, right? Where you kind of isolate these particular figures as opposed to understanding the importance of organizing, right, and indigenous leadership and the like. So I'm not trying to get beyond the prophetic tradition. I'm trying to reconstruct it, to reconstruct the heroic. There's a phrase that I use over and over again, close to the ground, right? So I want to think about the prophetic not as an act of persuasion, but as a decision of conduct. What does it mean to use the imagination as a way to critique the present by thinking about the as yet? What is possible becomes the basis for me, right, to critique now, right? And then that guide how I move in the world. And I'm trying to suggest that we all have that capacity, right? Don't, keep hearing in my head Emerson's language, we cannot be sacks and stomachs. We cannot be sacks and stomachs. We don't want to give over our power to these folks, right? And so the notion of the representative, of the prophetic and the heroic gets reconstructed as representative in the book, all opens up space for how we might think about the democratic. And the democratic is really an expanded notion of the demos, where we're all engaged in reaching for higher forms of excellences as we try to pursue a world that makes that possible. And to me, that offers, I have in mind, right, these young folk. Because at the time I'm delivering these lectures, I'm actually writing Democracy in Black.
Right.
I'm interviewing DeRay McKesson. I'm in Ferguson. So I'm actually doing that work. So they're in my head. So like I told you, out of this small book came 4 books.
Right.
It's kind of strange, but this is the soil.
Yeah.
This is the soil.
Yeah.
Right. So that movement is what I'm thinking about. Right. But I want to try to. So I wanted to reach for Miss Baker for a reason at the end. Although I might have yoked her too close to the anarchic sensibilities of Sheldon Morton. That's an argument that Jeff and I will have on the other day.
One of the things that you write about here is that the issue of self-recreation, right? And really this bigger question of what does it mean to pursue this democratic society. And so one of the things that I was thinking about in reading this is broken people can't create this wholly democratic society, right? Broken people can't create the kind of democracy that is truly representative that you're describing. And so, at one point, I think you're arguing that we need to be better people. Yeah. So, talk about that.
Yeah, you know, that aspiration for wholeness can get your ass in trouble.
This is the Malcolm discussion.
Right, so the aspiration for, right, so, you know, once it's broken, it's broken.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
Katsugi pottery, right?
Okay.
The broken pottery is filled with gold. The broken pot is actually more beautiful and valuable than the initial piece. So it's not whole anymore. And so part of what I'm trying to suggest is that, and this comes out of an insight from Baldwin, and people think that I'm not, when I make the move, that I'm not interested in the materialist question. Of course I am, right? I'm presupposing as the backdrop of what I'm doing. But the thing is, Baldwin says the messiness of the world is in part a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. That the sheriff that grabs his cock, right, in No Name in the Street, with his wet eyes. And wet eyes, if you read it across Baldwin's corpus, wet eyes is the metaphor for sentimentality. Right? He says, if only this guy, something is empty in him. There's something, he needs something that he doesn't want to deal with, right? So what does it mean to begin with wound? So the beginning of chapter 2 is the beginning of wound for me. It's not the beginning. It's me saying, okay, I got my goatee because it's a testimony to Malcolm X, right? I cut my political teeth in the Black nationalist tradition. Why? Because I found myself as a young man, as a young boy, deathly afraid of my father and feeling born out of place and time. Being a member of Gen X, in the shadow of the greatest generation America produced, sorry, that was Tom Brokaw. As complicated as baby boomers are, I still think y'all the greatest generation. Right. Those folk made us possible, right? And so when I left, my Norse gods behind, when I left, Spider-Man and Thor comics to the side, right? I reached for Malcolm, I reached for Stokely, I reached for Huey. Oh, I would have been in the Panther Party. I would have been serving breakfast. I would have been standing posts, right? And then when I got to Morehouse, I got baptized in King's Waters, right? And so I found myself over and over again caught between a form of love that left its marks, hard love, that left its marks, because my dad scared the shit out of me. And I felt like I was a coward. And so I was constantly trying to prove that I wasn't a coward, at least to myself, and feeling out of place in time. So I reached for hyper-masculinist politics to construct a notion of manhood, you see. Now, why is this important in relation to your question? Because we've got to find the right balance between piety, the right relation between piety, wound, and self-creation. What is my indebtedness to the past? How do I deal with the experiences that have split me in two? And find my voice in this moment so that I can speak and act on behalf of a world that will give us space to do exactly what I'm trying to do in a more affirming way. So the through line one of the through lines in the book is this act of self-creation.
Right.
I didn't rewrite the 3 lectures because I wanted you to see the contrast between the prose of the intro and the conclusion. So I gave it to Paul Taylor. He was like, the writing is different. This is smooth. This is, what are you doing? Right? Trying to get me to clean up. No, I want that tension, you know?
Yeah.
Because, or the battle I'm having with Cornell in the book.
Right.
Right?
That's another question.
Yeah, so but this
We gotta work our way to
this
this.
active, so I'm trying to model what I'm calling all of us to do,
Right,
to reach for higher forms of excellences. And the only way we can do that
okay.
is to deal with the fact that we're all wounded. And let me just say this really quickly. In active
No,
piety,
this is the best part of the Baldwin book for me.
in active
Yeah.
piety, Cornell West told me something when I was a graduate student that I'll never forget.
Mm.
I'll never forget. He told me a lot of things. I live by a lot of things he told me. He said, Brother Eddie, Brother Eddie, Brother Eddie. We're all wounded, brother. You just have to decide whether or not you're going to be a wounded healer or a wounded hurt.
Mm. What's he?
The interesting question is not what's he, is whether or not we can ever decide whether we are either one of them.
Okay.
Because self-reflexivity means if we're wounded, we're going to end up hurting people we love.
Mm.
And we're going to be creating the conditions under which people can see in our lives a pathway to healing.
Mm.
So it's not either or.
Right.
Because we want to avoid the self-righteous judgment, don't we?
All right. Can you talk about Black democratic perfectionism, which is a refrain you come back to, not just in this book, but democracy in Black as well?
Yeah.
Talk about this.
I'm trying to chart this tradition. One of these days I'm going to write a book or edit a volume of all of these people that I think are in this tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a reflection of my own kind of eclectic bricolage kind of approach to things, right? And that is, you can see the Emerson, you can see the Dewey, and you can see the Baldwin, all in that kind of clunky phrase. And I'm gonna explain it by way of an example. Is that okay? So James W.C. Pennington writes The Fugitive Blacksmith in 1840. Writes The Fugitive Blacksmith, the slave narrative. He's the first African American to attend Yale. He can't attend the classes. He has to sit outside the classroom. He receives an honorary doctorate in 1849 from Heidelberg University. So he writes The Fugitive Blacksmith. He says, the one thing I will never forgive slavery for, right, is that it robbed me of my education. He said, I've spent a lifetime trying to rid the sound of slavery from my tongue. But there's certain things that I can't remedy. Right? It's just, I wasn't exposed to certain things. And then he writes, he has this line, all that I've ever wanted to do was make myself more efficient for good. It's a beautiful line, right? More efficient for good. But that vile monster. So when you get in this paragraph, a sense of self-loathing, a sense of shame, right? This current self isn't what I aspire. So he wants to aspire to reach for another, but the world as it's organized gets in the way. How do we think about Du Bois' two unreconciled strivings? And one dog is so. What do we make of these folk across the tracks? We're trying to reach for higher forms of excellence in a world that says to them that you are less than. Again, in an essay in Black Power, written in response to Stokely Carmichael, Baldwin said, when Black folks step outside of the assumptions of white folk, we're talking revolution because we're the fixed star. So this is not some kind of radical individualistic kind of position, but what does it mean for us to engage in the project of self-creation in a world that wants to pin you in, right? That wants to pin you in, literally, right? And so Black democratic perfectionism is this radical politics, self-cultivation in pursuit of a more just world. Because if we aspire, we have to be better people. This is the cliche in the book. This is the cliche, organizing cliche of the book. If we are the leaders we've been looking for, we got to be better people. And if we're going to be better people, we got to produce a better world. So it's not self-cultivation, it's narcissistic, it's individual. So it's not neoliberalism, self-care nonsense, right? Right?
Yes.
So it's bound up with the world that is acting on us, that's exacting choices from us. that's limiting us. And those of you who are Dewey readers, you know what I'm doing in that moment. It's an organism engaging in transactions with this environment. And as the organism acts on this environment, right, the environment acts on the organism. Right? And it's in that context that we reach for higher forms of excellence. Okay? Because at the heart of, the beating heart of my work is the moral question. What kind of human being are you? And what kind of human being do you aspire to be?
On that, I'm curious, there's a, I don't know if it's a tension for you, reading your work. You're clearly influenced by Emerson, by Dewey. You're writing about Black politics, Black political tradition, which, in my mind at least, has always been tied to the collective, right? That's what Black politics is about how do you improve the collective circumstances of Black people. And people have, there are different approaches to that. We're talking about a Black political tradition, there's a Black radical tradition, but all kind of animated around this question about the collective condition of Black people. And Emerson is concerned about the individual, and Transcendentalism is concerned about the individual. So I'm wondering if you could talk about your influences and how they relate also to your interventions in Black political thought.
Yeah, so I mean, we just, yeah, it's a reflection of my training. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm being unnecessarily loving here, but this is a reflection of being trained in the religion department, the African religion department at Princeton, where you have Cornel West, Jeffrey Stout, John Gage. I mean, we just give you all of these people. The subfield is religion, ethics, and politics. Mm-hmm. And you're reading all of these people, and they're coming to you in very extraordinary ways. Pragmatism comes to you in very, you know, I mentioned these folks in the book. What does it mean to read with Albert Rabbitoh? What does it mean to read with Cornel West? What does it mean to read with Jeffrey Stout? I'm getting introduced to the archive in a particular sort of way from Al. God bless his soul. I'm getting introduced to a range of thinkers and close, careful reading by Jeff. And then I'm in a black hole with Cornell, trying to figure out what the hell am I supposed to do? I'm getting the breath of what he's doing, right? So there's a way in which we push back on a kind of narrow reading of Emerson and Transcendental. That's just simply about it. But I think part of what I was trying to do is to figure out how these traditions speak to each other. Because they are talking to each other. When you read Charles Johnson, he's citing Dewey. He's engaged with Dewey explicitly. When you read Du Bois works with William James. So he's thinking. And Julia Cooper is thinking in this tradition. So there are ways in which these Black folk are thinking with the resources of philosophical pragmatism, but aren't engaged in a professional practice. They're trying to address in interesting sorts of ways their political conditions. And so what I've tried to do is to figure out what pragmatism look like when I snatch it by the nape of its neck and bring it across the tracks. And what happens to Black...
Emerson singing the blues.
Right. What happens to the Black political tradition? What opens up in the Black political tradition when I bring these questions to it? How might I read the archive differently? What happens to David Walker's appeal when I read it in that way? That's what. And when I first published my first book, Exodus, we couldn't find readers. Chicago couldn't find readers. They would send it to theologians, and theologians would be, what the hell is this? And then they would send it to historians, and the historians are, what the hell is this? Right? We couldn't find, so we had to write our way into a public that could understand the work, to see how it fit. You know? So for me, I'm always engaged in this conversation in my head. And you know, it might very well be a very American thing to do.
Right.
giving my Albert Murray in my head here, you know, to think about these things not as silos, right, but as thoroughly intervention. But you know, Dewey, you know, there's an apocryphal story. Dewey walked around in Harlem and was like, I don't know how these people get up in the morning. Right? You know, so there's a sense in which, you know, the old man who's writing is, oh God, reading Dewey, it's like looking at swollen feet. But
There's an image.
he couldn't quite think his way through the contradictions of race with regards to his understanding of democracy. And the other man from Concord had his position on slavery, but he had some issues too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Let me just ask you a slightly askew question.
We might get to y'all, we're not sure.
Yeah, fine. What's the role, this is sort of out of context from what we have been talking about.
Sure.
What do you think the role of the public intellectual is in these kinds of deliberations? Because clearly in the book, there are all sorts of influences and people that you are engaged with, whose writing that you're engaged with and in conversation with throughout the book. And a lot of those include public intellectuals. Du Bois, Gates, Imani Perry, Cornel West, obviously, Michael Dyson. And so, what do you think the role of public intellectuals are in some of the processes that you are talking about? Yourself.
Right.
You know.
You know, there's a wonderful essay written by John Dewey titled The Influence of Darwin on Philosophy. And what I see myself doing, to be honest with you, is an extension of my philosophical commitments. And so, the pragmatist is charged to bring his or her skill set to bear on the problems of their learning, to engage in moral diagnosis and prognosis. Right? And so, what does it mean for me to think carefully in public about this? To bring the full weight of my bibliography to bear on the subject matter. I've been blessed to have an opportunity to be on MSNBC, and what has happened, blessed might be a strong word, what has happened is that I've cultivated the expectation of thinking differently about a problem in front of us, of trying to recast the conversation in light of, right, a whole host of resources that are not deployed with the aim of establishing my expertise as a scholar, but rather to open up how we might think about the subject in front of us. That's my aim. So what does it mean for me? The public intellectual stuff as a moniker has become more, it obscures it more than it reveals. But what does it mean to think carefully in public with others? Is to create the conditions under which we don't rush to the easy answer. Right? That we can, and for me, that involves, and I'm sorry, it involves the ongoing insistence on forcing you to deal with my obsession. And my obsession is the obsession with history. Who do we take ourselves to be? The question of identity. Who do we take ourselves to be? How do we come to be? Who do we take ourselves to be? And the question of agency. What can we do? How do we act in this world? So what are the conditions? As Cornell used to tell me, we've got to contextualize, historicize, and pluralize. That's from way back when I was a young man, right? Right? So how do we come to be? What are the conditions under which this problem comes to be? Right? How do I understand it? Right? And how does it impact how I understand myself? Which then emerges, that understanding is deepened in the very way in which I act in the world. I come to a clear understanding of who I take myself to be, because it's eulogistic, right? in the process of acting itself. Does that make sense? So this is what I'm trying, what I take myself to be doing as a public intellectual. So for me, when I'm on television, or when I'm writing in the broader space,
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to be a pragmatist, philosophically. Because I'm not interested in the professional practice. I'm not denigrating it, right? But I'm trying to do something. And to be more specific, I'm trying to help the nation finally understand itself.
Well, that is a good moment to transition. Do we have any questions out here?
You can ask me anything, it doesn't mean that I'm going to answer.
Any over here? Yeah.
This morning
was up first, and I'll go next.
Oh. And she can answer some questions too. Please.
Shouldn't give this.
I'll give it like that.
I'll give it.
Soften it a little bit, because I'm going to bring my world into the question. So you talk about your father, your mother's voice. What was your relationship with her? And that goes back to, I'm a grandmother, and my grandson, 13 years old, he's up in mixed race, just got into trouble. And on the school bus, and got into a fist fight, and that all, but I love my grandson, and he's a good boy, I love him. What should I say to him?
What should you
Say to my grandson?
to
Inspire him. To let him understand that, what should I say to him? I don't know. That's why I'm saying, where is your mother's voice?
Oh, my mom's voice. I was on Nicole Wallace yesterday. And, and my mother called me right afterwards. They always call me afterwards. My dad to tell me, you should have said it this way. And she said, I heard you. You said you was Juanita's baby. Part of what I was saying is that, we all inevitably lose our way. The world puts, in my world at least, I'm constantly faced with the temptation of the bride. And that is to reconcile myself to the world as it is, and just get paid. But I have a center of moral gravity, and it's my mom. I'm one of Nita's baby. So if the man is scaring the shit out of me, depositing fear in me, what is my mama doing? Loving me unconditionally. Loving me unconditionally. Creating this space for me to be as weird and quirky as I could possibly be. Providing the space for me to imagine myself in the most expansive of terms. So in the moment in which your grandson confronts the reality of what the quote-unquote Negro problem is, Baldwin put it this way in his essay, Blues People. Whatever white America says the Negro problem is, it is this: that every Negro parent has to face and confront that child and raise that child who will be told that they're not worth anything. And they would have to raise that child in such a way that they will not believe what the world says about them. You see? So in the midst of me doing things that boys do, grandsons do, how do we love them into the crown that's placed above their heads? Right? So, I'm gonna need this child, always. Had her first baby in the 9th grade. Cleaned toilets for her. 20 years old when she got married. 21 was my father. 4 kids. 2 of them was not my dad's. I didn't find that out till high school. Right? They grew up with us. And when my dad just got sick, almost died last week, septic shock, my brother was there. And my sister just scared the shit out of the doctor. Because we were all Eddie Glaude's babies, and we'll need his children. But anyway, that's too much. I'll be more succinct, I promise. Don't have to get me. I had to talk my way out of being toe up. That's what
We saw that.
So, can I ask my question now?
Sure, and I'll be more succinct, I promise.
Okay, so I'll try to be succinct. So I am obsessed with the advice that Dr. West gave to you around, or the assertion that Dr. West made with you around hurt people. I work in the space of organization development. I really want culture to change. And so I'm thinking about the emergence, the rise of the neo-Confederates, beginning with the Tea Party and now the Trump people, right? So how do you see us, those of us who, especially those of us who are African descent, who really, I think we took on the belief of the founding documents in a way that no other group has taken on, because those documents are what offer us freedom, offer us our ability to be men and women. So how do you see us talking through or talking with that group of people in our country who are scared to death and are, basically, turning to violence is the only way that they know how to address it.
I appreciate that. There's a wonderful line in Jim Wallace's new book, The False Gospel, The False White Gospel. And I keep coming back to it. He says we have to be mindful of this. That there's some people we need to persuade, and some people we need to defeat. Some people we need to persuade, and some people we need to defeat. Because oftentimes, over the course of our history, the way in which certain folk have thought about persuading people who hold certain views about black people, brown people, who really aren't committed to democracy, they make certain sorts of compromises that we then have to bear the brunt of. And then, it comes back. Douglas said in his July 5th, 1852 address, there is a horrible reptile in the nation's bosom. Right? Wants us to tear it away. Now that serpent is eating our entrails. Right? And it's because we consistently compromise. And we think we're persuading. Right? There's some people we need to persuade, and there's something we need to finally defeat. And those who turn to violence as a neo-Confederate position, right? Because Richard Slockett in his forthcoming book with Harvard says that we're in a second redemption. We're in the midst of a second lost cause, right? And I should say this. I said this on Morning Joe the other day that I worry about our children in those classrooms, but I'm more worried about those white kids because in the first lost cause, they became the adults who showed up in Mississippi and Montgomery, right, and Florida, Texas, right. They were the ones who were doing the ugliness, doing the horrible things. So let's just figure out who we can persuade and then who we need to defeat, right? Because we only have a finite amount of signal.
Do you want to read any part?
We have a question back there that we have a couple of questions that I can read at the end. How long we got? We got 2 minutes. Then you got the mic.
Dr. Glaude, I, like you, had the honor of teaching college students. And I love mine, like I'm sure you love yours. But they're scared. This is a world they don't know what to do with. They're phone obsessed. like all college students, but they're scared. And when you say to them, get involved, and you say to them, get to work, and you tell them to go vote, and all these things, they look at you blankly. At least mine do. I don't know about yours. But what do you say? I'm taking advice. And I think a lot of people here are about what to say to young people about what to do with the world that they're been thrown into.
I'm gonna leave. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, please don't tell me that.
It's a great question. You know, and let me just be clear. Just because you run your mouth for a living doesn't mean you have the answers. Amen. We all need to believe this. Just because you run your mouth for a living doesn't mean you all have the answers. And collectively, we probably come to some conclusions that would be better than what I would say. Something I would say, right? The only thing I would, the world, Toni Morrison in her Nobel lectures is very clear. It's in your hands. Whatever you're thinking, it's in your hands. Right. So the question becomes, right? My son one time dropped 40 points in an AAU basketball game, and he was so excited. I think he was 13. He was so excited. He called me. I was on the road in Maryland. He said, "Dad, I dropped 40 points." And I said, "That's wonderful." And then I said, "Now, what would have happened if you had gone to the game with the intention of dropping 40 points?" I said, "You always do this." So if it's in your hands, what does it mean to take responsibility for it? To get clear on one's commitments. To have an understanding of justice without exception. A clear view of justice without exception. And to act on it. Right? So what we need to do is to create the conditions under which our students can engage in the kind of reflections. They're in a wonderful space where they can do it. Right? Where they can be clear about the world they want to live in. And their commitments. And how to live those commitments fully. Because the moral question is the beating heart. What kind of human being do you aspire to be? Right?
So you're saying it's about challenging them to figure out who they want to be.
Right. And taking responsibility for it. And being deliberate about it. Right? It's not just, I'm a human being, I just need to live. No. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's still true. It's still true. That's the only way we can reach for higher excellences. Right? We have to be deliberate about the life that we choose to live. Okay? Yes? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, my question is going to kind of be really off anyway.
I was going to give the mic to her.
Do you think that the real problem is the problem of a color?
The problem of
A color.
our color?
Yes, a color. It's the problem of a color. And because that color is a color that describes a negative state, in meaning, that is in meaning, when you're teaching grammar, you teach red, brown, green, yellow, white, and then black, and each one has a meaning. So, would you say that the effect or the impact of this one adjective that is the center of a country's civilization, you're intellectualizing around it, but essentially what it's doing is it's creating a regression in the progress of an entire country and nation because it is an adjective. It describes a state, a thing, an object, and its impact and influence. In the European culture, it was always negative. Black death, black tongue, black adder, black ear, black toe. It meant death. Is that correct? You go to a funeral, you wear black. It is negative. And so it creates a fear already. So you have a society that's regressing, which now have brown people, purple people, rainbow people, and in the center of this is this fearful adjective, or this adjective that generates fear in terms of meaning and thought. And do you think perhaps that is what needs to be corrected in terms of grammar, speech, and education?
I actually think, I appreciate your question and your thought. If I understand it correctly, I'm going to respond to it in this way. I actually think that the problem is not the adjective black. I think the problem is the adjective white. I actually make the point in Democracy in Black that this value gap, this valuation, that some people, because of the color of their skin, are accorded dignity and standing, are valued in different sorts of ways. And I use the value gap purposely because I'm trying to, in some ways, reference a market sensibility, right? And so, someone asked me, what would it take to finally rip the horrible reptile from our bosom, the nation's bosom? And I said, deliberately and provocatively, white people have to die. And I think you can be so much more than that, right? So what does it mean if we finally, right, get rid of the assumption that was behind the doctrine of discovery, the assumption that was behind slavery, the assumption that's behind, right? What happens when we open up what really is behind this? Because the problem, Baldwin would be very clear, the problem has never been me. I've never been the N-word. The question is, why do you need the N-word in the first place? So I give you back the N-word. Who's really here? But we can talk about this. But I hear that anti-black move. I hear it. That anti-blackness move, yes. So we're done. Are we? Yes. Read this really quickly and then we can go. Again, the book is not easy, but I thank you for trying to read it. The kind of salvation I'm talking about is not found in such tricky magic. Nor is it in some heavenly by. Salvation is not flight from the wrath of God, Baldwin declares. It is accepting and reciprocating the love of God. Salvation is not separation. It's the beginning of the union with all that is or has been or will ever be. It is found in the going toward, evident in the politics of tending, and love is its carriage. The rantings of a romantic madman? Perhaps. But this is the gift I found in the tradition that is the wind beneath my wings. The world remains cruel, and the United States is especially maddening. But the words of the late Toni Morrison seem more resonant than ever. Quote, "Of course there is cruelty. Cruelty is a mystery. But if we see the world as one long brutal game, then we bump into another mystery. The mystery of beauty, of light, the canary that sings on the skull. Unless all ages and all races of man have been deluded, there seems to be such a thing as grace, such a thing as beauty, such a thing as harmony, all wholly free and available to us." End quote. Now fly.